Hi everyone, this is another lecture video on the section 7.1, 7.2 material. In this lecture video, I'm going to briefly talk about the inverse function property. There is a property with functions and their inverses, which is the following. I have this right now on this Word document. This involves a composition of a function with its inverse and a composition of an inverse with the original function. If you have f inverse and it is evaluated at f of x, this will be equal to x for all x's within the range of f inverse. Likewise, if you look at f composed with f inverse of x, this will also be equal to x for all x inside the range of the original function f of x. This is a pretty useful property. It's up to you if you would like to memorize or use this approach here when you're dealing with a function composed with its inverse and vice versa. It will not always work. The only times when these properties apply here is when the input x, let me underline that, the input x here is inside the range of the outermost function. Let's take a look at some examples. So here in these problems, there's three of them. You can't see the third one. I'll get to it in a bit. In these three problems, you were asked to evaluate the following. You were asked to do this without a calculator. Let's take a look at that first example. Sine inverse of sine of pi over 4. Now, I had talked about how we deal with these problems in a previous lecture video. You could do the innermost evaluation first. So you could do the sine of pi over 4, find what that is, and then find sine inverse of that result. If you do not want to do that, though, and you want to try to use this inverse function property, make sure that the function on the outside and the function on the inside, they're inverses of one another. So, for example, this is sine inverse of sine. So these two are inverses of one another. You need to check if the innermost input, which in this case would be pi over 4, you need to check if that is inside the range of sine inverse. The range of sine inverse is from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2 inclusive. So the answer to this is just pi over 4. Let me write that a little better. And once again, this follows because pi over 4 is inside the range of sine inverse. Let's take a look. Sorry about that. Let's take a look at the next problem. Number 2, sine inverse of sine of 3 pi over 4. Okay, in this problem, you cannot use the inverse function that was mentioned at the beginning of this video. Why? This input of 3 pi over 4, it is not inside the range of sine inverse. Because this 3 pi over 4 is not inside the range of sine inverse, you cannot use the inverse function property from the beginning of this video. We will have to do the innermost evaluation, which is sine of 3 pi over 4, and then we will look at sine inverse of that result. Sine of 3 pi over 4 is root 2 over 2. Sine inverse of root 2 over 2, this will be equal to pi over 4. Let's take a look at this last example. You have cosine of cosine inverse of -1. -1 is inside the range of the cosine function, right? So you can just say that this is just equal to -1 using your inverse function property. Let me circle my answer here. My goodness, let me rewrite that one more time. Okay. So like I said, it's up to you if you want to use this inverse function property for some of these problems. Make sure that your function on the outside, like that guy there, and the function on the inside, like this guy here, they are inverses of one another. And and you also need to make sure that the input, the very first input, is within the range of the outermost function. Once again, let's take a look at the first two examples. Number 1, pi over 4 is in the range of sine inverse. So the inverse function property applies, and so your answer is just that pi over 4. But with number 2, 3 pi over 4 is not within the range of sine inverse, and so you have to deal with this evaluation here in the inside. We did that sine of 3 pi over 4. That was equal to root 2 over 2. And then we looked at sine inverse of root 2 over 2. Alrighty, everyone, that's just a quick lecture video of section 7.2, and I will see you in our Zoom meeting at 5:30.